there's no limited warfare option when it comes to open conflict with North Korea.
We're talking months of fighting. You're going to see large amounts of artillery, large amounts of munitions dropped from aircraft, from B-52s, B-1s, B-2s. You're going to see a shelling of the terrain on the Korean Peninsula that you only see in the movies from World War II and the Korean War.
This is a very brutal, very deadly regime.
In the event of a military conflict on the Korean Peninsula, we have a situation where we could potentially be talking about the second, third, and 11th largest economies in the world engaged in a military conflict.
The scale of fighting will be greater than anything we've seen around the world since the Korean War, not just on the Korean Peninsula.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so first things first. What we need to do is talk about the course and organizing the course, and make sure I don't press any wrong buttons, because you press one wrong button on Zoom and some bad things can happen. All right, so I'm screen sharing the lesson plan for today. And yes, the time, what we've all been waiting for. Of course, you have a paragraph due on by Wednesday, 7 o'clock in the morning, so I can write comments and send it back to you on this topic. To South Koreans, the U.S. Trump administration's highly unusual foreign policy decision-making process increases the chances for maintaining peace on the Korean Peninsula. So, of course, that video I showed you from Vox, which I guess is a left-of-center online reputable news source, is from over 2 years ago, 2.5 years. It was posted over 2.5 years ago. I think they talk about they talk about the improvement in U.S.-Korean relations under Trump, when leading to Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un later. But of course, at the beginning of the Trump administration was promising fire and fury against North Korea if North Korea was continuing to act in a belligerent way towards the United States and its allies. So now, you know, things changed, appeared to change, at least on the surface, when Trump met, I think, twice with Kim Jong-un. Not much has happened since then, given that the world's been preoccupied over the last 7 months with the COVID-19 pandemic. And now with the U.S. election coming up in a month and a half. So the debate topic is very timely, right? To South Koreans, the U.S. Trump administration's highly unusual foreign policy decision-making process increases the chances for maintaining peace on the Korean Peninsula. Pro or con? And I will be pro, because nobody else signed up, but Subin Ju signed up to be con. Hooray! And I think Subin was in one of my classes previously. So Subin Ju is already well aware of the format for the debate topic. So you're all going to prepare, along with Subin Ju, for the debate topic, for the debate, by writing, of course, a 150-word pro or con paragraph on the week 4 paragraph on the debate topic, and submitting it to Cyber Campus. But before I forget, we need to, because last time I did forget, we need to go to Cyber Campus attendance. And so let me click on the attendance link here and go to week 4 and smart attendance. Ready, set, go. There's your number, 660. So you have, I think, 10 minutes. So please enter that number in order to indicate your attendance. And I don't think I need to stay here for you to see that, right? The number is 660. Right? So maybe I do need to stay there, because you can't see it if you, well, maybe, yeah. Okay, it's 660. Okay, 660. All right, so we did that, you know, and that was an issue because the Cyber Campus wasn't working until 9 o'clock this morning. So, all right, so 660. And so back to the debate topic. And then we're going to have a debate on Friday, a Zoom debate. And the format for the debate here is, I think I showed you this file once before already. Pro is affirmative, same as pro or affirmative mean the same thing, right? So I will start off by speaking for up to 6 minutes, making my pro argument. And Subin will then make her opening statement. You can see opening statement for up to 6 minutes arguing con. Then I will rebut Subin for up to 4 minutes. And you can see rebuttal here, right? Rebuttal for up to 4 minutes. And then Subin will speak for the second and last time to rebut what I argued and to conclude for 7 minutes. And then pro always gets the last word for rebuttal and conclusion for up to 3 minutes. And then when the debate is over, I'm going to ask you to vote on the debate, who won, pro or con, and to grade the debate, you know, on a scale of 0 to 4.5. 4.5, of course, is A, it's Catholic University of Korea. It's A plus, the Catholic University of Korea. 4 is A, 3.5 is B plus, 3 is B, and so on. And you, in terms of evaluating the debate, I want you to evaluate the debate in terms of the quality of the opening statement, the quality of the rebuttal, the presentation quality as well. Was it clearly presented? Did the presenter use audio-visual aids like PowerPoint presentation or YouTube clips? Like, you know, this is a YouTube clip, right? Or just a Microsoft Word file like this file to help you follow along with their points. And then also I want you want to win the debate. So the students are going to vote anonymously because polling does have an anonymous feature. Will vote on who won the debate. It will be anonymous, so I won't know who voted how. And you want to persuade them to vote for you, and you want to persuade them by making the best argument, the best rebuttal, and making a nice presentation. And you also want to show that your ideas and claims have a foundation in the information in the reading for the week, in the scholarly knowledge that's in the reading for the week, to support, develop, and refine your points, to persuade them that you are right and I am wrong. Or Subin wins the debate, okay? And I know that in Zoom, it is possible to share hosting of the Zoom so that the idea here is Subin will be able to show you her screen the way I am showing you my screen. But I'm thinking that might need to be set up separately. Like, what's this remote control? I don't want to press the wrong button here. Maybe this is it here. Give mouse and keyboard control to Subin. Where's Subin Ju? I don't see Subin Ju here. Well, I have to work on this, right? And so my opponent will be able to share the screen the way I share the screen. So if they have a PowerPoint presentation to show, they can show it to you the way I'm showing you my files, okay? And it's not a problem. I've seen it done. I just haven't done it in this class yet. But I will be in contact with the debaters to set that up. And then let me remind you that according to the syllabus, and let's see if I can find that the syllabus for the class, that the debate is 15% of the grade. I always grade the debate easily. Don't get nervous. I know it's kind of unusual. Some of you've never spoken in front of a group before. Well, the only way you get better at public speaking is through practice, right? And preparation. Preparation and practice are the keys. And so you can see the debate presentations are 15% of the final course grade. You know, students always get A's and B's on this, unless something bad happens, you know, like a student, you know, just walks out or quits the debate halfway, you're going to get a good grade, okay? And so, and I assign the grade, but I need the students' feedback on the debate, because, you know, I'm an American, English is my native language, you know, I'm 58 years old, I'm a professor. So I have different ways of interpreting the debate presentation than you, the students. So I want to know how the students are interpreting or reacting to the debate as I figure out what grade to give at the end of the semester to everybody once all the debates are done in December. Okay? So, but I give the final debate, and I typically grade a lot easier than the students do. I mean, I've seen that for 10 years, that I give higher grades in the debate than the students do. So, but you'll be voting anonymously on that, okay? So, and that will be on Friday. So, you know, that's our 1 hour class, so we don't have a lot of time. So I'll talk for a few minutes, and then we'll go to the debate. We'll have to set aside at least 40 minutes for it because, you know, with the Zoom and internet, it might be a little bit slower. Okay, all right. So let me go back to the other file here. So, you know, I think I posted this already on Cyber Campus. I'll post it again, and let's see. Okay, so back to the debate topic. Anybody, if you have any questions, you know, don't be ashamed to don't be ashamed. Don't be too shy to ask. Of course, ask. And oh, that reminds me, we forgot to do a poll at the end of last class following our class debate. And so to get us into more into the Zoom mind frame, I want to go to polling here and click on polling. And let's see. All right, so that's the question, right? To South Koreans, the history, am I recording this? I think I am. Okay, yeah. To South Koreans, the history of U.S. international influence expansion is ultimately due to U.S. geographic isolation by large oceans from other powerful states. In other words, U.S. is super powerful and influential, not because it's a beacon, a shining city on a hill with its commitment to political liberalism and economic liberalism and its superior democratic institutions and culture. No, it's because it hasn't been close enough to big powers that it has to be always preparing and spending huge amounts of resources on preparing for big war. Yeah, I know the U.S. has been at war for most of its history. I think, again, I read something like only in 16 years of U.S. history, since the U.S. came into existence, has the U.S. not been at war with somebody. But that includes wars with Indian tribes, little Indian tribes that have no resources. Does that count as being at war? If you compare, say, with France, right? Since we have some French students, France borders on Spain and Germany, and so France, like other European countries, has either been preparing for war with big, powerful enemies, fighting wars with big, powerful enemies, and recovering from devastating wars with big, powerful enemies. U.S. has been at war too, but with little Indian tribes, with Spain in the 1890s. Okay, they had a big war in the Civil War. Yeah, okay, that was a big war. And the war with the British at the end of the 18th century, at the beginning of the 19th century, those were significant. But that's it. And then it was at war in World War I and World War II, but it was barely touched by those wars. I mean, keep that in mind. The U.S. economy doubled in size during World War II. While Japan was being destroyed and Germany was being destroyed and the Soviet Union was being destroyed, the United States economy increased in size 100% in World War II. To produce, at the end of the war, nearly half of the world's total economic output was just the United States. Okay, so that leads into our poll. So let's vote. Launch poll. And okay, so please vote. Of the 12 people here, pro or con? One more person. Okay, so end poll and share results. And so you can see the results there. Con wins. So although there's a lot of people who vote pro. And so, all right. So it's not just the fact that U.S. has been protected and isolated from the rest of the world for most of its history. It is rather, there's something special about Migu. there's something really special about Migu. Stop sharing. Okay. All right. So let me close that and go back to the lesson plan here. And so, yeah, I showed a clip at the start of the European Union policymaking class the day after the attack segment from the 1983 television film about war, a nuclear war, when Ronald Reagan was president. I'm not showing it now because there's no time, although maybe I can show it during break, but I wanted to make sure I showed it before the start of the cyber campus teaching because you know, it's hard to do between classes. But yeah, the Cold War and decision-making processes in the United States. So let's go to the notes because we have to make sure we cover some of the notes, right? And so let me go to here, and here we go. Chapter 3, Dynamics of European Policymaking. Now, let me, yeah, okay, so let's start off with that. And I already posted these notes on Cyber Campus on the weekend. And so, you know, this is a book on U.S. foreign policy making, and I do remember I do have a copy of the book. Here's the copy of the book. Ta-da, ta-da, right? And so this book is an introduction to foreign policy analysis and also an introduction to theories of international relations. And so theories are beneficial. Theories guide your thinking. Like I already said, right? One of the nice aspects of Kenneth Waltz's book, Man, the State, and War, and his levels of analysis framework is that it guides your thinking. So when you're, as I like to say, because it's kind of funny, right? When your Hal Almany asks you, as a student at Catholic University of Korea, explain why the Korean War happened, you know that Kenneth Waltz's 3 levels of analysis, international system level causation, state level factors of causation in politics, and individual levels of causation in foreign policy, you need to provide an answer to that question about why the Korean War started, or why the Cold War ended, or why Donald Trump met Kim Jong-un as the first US president to meet a leader of North Korea. Your answer has to include elements at all 3 levels of analysis. That's the beauty of that framework, right? You must, because all 3 factors, levels of causation are necessary, if not sufficient, for explaining something in international relations and foreign policy. So, you know, you can't just say it's because United States, because Donald Trump is creative and entrepreneurial. Okay, that's individual level of factor of analysis. He's a businessman. He thinks about doing deals. Okay, another individual factor level of analysis. But you also have to include that the United States has a tradition of being somewhat isolationist. Now the Cold War has been over since 1991, and the economic dislocation of the United States as a result of globalization with greater income differentiation is causing a rising discontent and support for alternative political figures who are promising to withdraw U.S. Commitments to the rest of the world. That's a state level factor of analysis unique to the United States, American culture, American history, American institutions. And then you need to also include the fact that there's no overarching international systemic level threat, right? Like during the Cold War, you know, the Americans believed that at any time, any day, the Soviet Union might launch a nuclear attack in the United States the way the Japanese launched a surprise attack in the United States and Pearl Harbor to begin World War II. The Soviet Union might do the same thing, that it might launch a surprise nuclear attack to destroy the United States before the United States could respond. That's not there anymore. That doesn't exist now, right? So the Americans overall do not see this overarching collective perception of intense challenge from the outside world. So the lack of an intense conflict between great powers compared to, you know, now maybe compared to what happened during the Cold War, maybe one will emerge between China and the United States, and there's a lot of talk about that. But that's the beauty of theories. They guide your thinking. They point you in directions. They don't tell you what the answers are, but they help you think through determining what the answers are. Okay, and different theories emphasize different perspectives, different elements. I really like my theory. I think my theory that I was trained in by my professor when I was in school is the best theory. but I want to, I think it integrates all of these different factors of analysis at different levels. The theories Hook presents, that's the author, Professor Hook, presents here, focus on analyzing why decision makers make their decisions in the way they do in the foreign policy making process. So again, he's focused not only, but primarily on state level factors of causation and individual level factors of causation in American foreign policy behavior, right? And so he wants to focus on studying the process of making foreign policy decisions in the United States. For example, why did Barack Obama decide to negotiate a compromise with Iran regarding its nuclear program? Why has Trump revoked it? Right? Why has Trump revoked what Obama negotiated in the joint JCOP, the Joint Cooperative Framework? I can't remember the agreement with Iran to remove economic sanctions on Iran in return for Iran dismantling its nuclear program. Trump has revoked it and has put the sanctions back on Iran. Who was involved in that? Was it a rational process, whatever that means? Was it a foolish decision? What were the different bureaucratic perspectives? The foreign policy bureaucracy, the State Department, U.S. Foreign Ministry, for example. The Defense Department's different perspective. They often have a different perspective from the State Department. The Congress, interest groups, corporations, right? Those of you who think American foreign policy or any country's foreign policy is all about the money, you have difficulty explaining American foreign policy in the Middle East on the basis of oil money, because oil companies in the United States, fossil fuel companies in the United States have been desperately pressuring or asking the US government to let them back into Iran because there's so much money to be made in Iran. I mean, the American oil industry dominated the Iranian oil infrastructure until the Shah was overthrown in the late 1970s, right? They built the pipeline system in Iran. It's still there. They want to go back because it can make so much money, and they're not allowed to go back in. And that's because of, primarily because of the Israel lobby. So those of you who think foreign policy is all driven by money and oil and gas companies, no, I don't think that's true. So the global context, now this is international system level. He's got to talk about it because, you have to talk about it, but he's not going to focus on it in the rest of the book. So structural realism is a theory of international relations. That holds that the world is inherently a conflictual place because there's no world government. There's no world government. And so the only actor for a state that will ultimately take care of that state is the state itself. We compared, for example, the difference in France. In France, most French citizens don't think about, oh, any moment now, somebody could jump out of the shadows, stab me in the back, and steal my wallet and run away. And so I got to be prepared. I have to have a weapon. I have to have a sword. I have to have a gun, because you never can tell. And nobody's going to protect me but me. You don't worry about that in South Korea. You don't worry about that in France. And you generally don't worry about that in the United States, because there's a powerful government that oversees relations among the actors within France or South Korea or United States, that you have confidence in it, in its monitoring policies, in its ability to arrest bad people who commit crimes, put them on trial, put them in jail. Nothing like that exists at the international level. It's a system of anarchy, right? And that was, I don't want to talk too much about this, but you need to hear about it because, if you take a course on foreign policy and international relations, talk about the Treaty of Westphalia, people are going to wonder, what did you study? The Treaty of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War in Europe. And the 30 Years' War was horrible. It marked a transition from late medieval Europe to modern Europe, insofar as, for example, it established, after 30 years of war, that was articulated in terms of religion, right? Remember, this is at a time when people were overwhelmingly religious, and that's how they interpreted the world. And so state leaders justified their rule by enforcing religious beliefs on their peasants, mostly peasants. there are people, mostly peasants, some city dwellers, but 90% of people who lived in these countries were peasants, farmers. And the rise of the Protestant Revolution, Reformation, and the disruption to politics that caused a war, that when it was finally over, almost half of the territory of Germany, the population died. It was horribly destructive. And that's an important point to note, that to end the war, they agreed that the leaders of each of the states of Europe could themselves decide what would be the state religion. It was no longer going to be the Catholic Church. The Holy Roman Emperor, the German leader of Central Europe, no longer could enforce Catholic religious and political authority over Europe, right? The Holy Roman Emperor claimed to be the sword of the Pope, right? The Holy Roman Emperor, and the Pope claimed to have sovereignty over everybody ultimately, over the kings and queens of Europe. And that was officially acknowledged no longer to be the case. And of course, the Pope wasn't too happy about it. But that established that it wasn't about democracy. It was about that I'm the leader of this country and I'm a Protestant, so my people are Protestant. And yeah, I won't abuse the Catholics, but still, I'm the one in charge. I promise not to abuse the Catholic minority, but I'm the one in charge, not the Pope and not the Holy Roman Emperor. And so that established the principle of sovereignty, that states are ultimately the most authoritative actors in the world, not the Pope, not the Holy Roman Empire, the independent sovereign states of the world, well, at least of Europe. And that they had to depend on themselves to protect themselves. They couldn't rely upon the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor, and they had to make agreements with each other to balance and protect against other countries that are also making agreements with other countries. So they had to maintain alliances, and they could change alliances. They could make alliance one day with one country and then change their mind about what's in their best interest by the leader and make an alliance with another country. And that established this security dilemma that we talked about earlier, right? That as countries acknowledge that only they are responsible for their own well-being, they have to prepare for the worst case possible outcome. Like, my neighbor's a nice guy, but he could die tomorrow and be replaced by his son as the new king, and his son's a jerk. And his son might decide to use that military for defense to attack me. So I had to prepare for that, because who knows? And so I will build up my military further to compensate for the growing military next door, and that makes them nervous for the same reason I'm nervous. And this leads to the so-called security dilemma, that one country's efforts to ensure its national security can undermine other countries automatically without intending to, without aiming to. And again, this is relevant to the present because, again, structural realists claim that one of the reasons why European integration happens today under the European Union and peace between France and Germany, for example, is because America's overwhelming dominance of Europe means that the French don't have to worry about getting stabbed in the back by the Germans, and the Germans don't have to worry about getting stabbed in the back by the French, because America's there towering over both of them, watching them both, making sure that it will prevent that from ever happening, and the Germans and the French believe it will never happen, right? And by the way, keep in mind, it wasn't always the case that countries have always been sovereign and in control of their own territory, right? One of the points I like to show students or talk to students about is how, in Korea, that when you come to Korea, you learn how you're supposed to meet people, how you're supposed to greet people, right? You're supposed to bow, right? How do Europeans and Americans greet each other? They do this handshake thing, right? Sorry, I can't really do it since I have just two hands, right? So they meet and they shake hands, right? Why do they do that? Why do they shake hands? because hundreds of years ago, if you were centuries ago walking in the countryside and you met somebody on the road at night, they could kill you, steal your money, and run away, and very little chance that anything would be done to punish them, to arrest them and punish them. So if you met somebody, you would shake their hands to make sure that they didn't have a knife hidden up their sleeve, right? So if you shake their hand, supposedly their knife would fall out. That's the world that was Europe before the establishment of strong sovereign states, right? And Thomas Hobbes is maybe the most influential English philosopher because he's encouraged so many other people who love him or hate him. They're all responding to him. And he talks about what life is like without a strong central state. He calls it the state of nature, the state of nature. And in the state of nature, because people basically are evil and aggressive and greedy, they will hurt you. If they think they can get away with it, they will stab you in the back. And he was writing at the time of the breakdown of the late medieval state in Britain, with the Protestant Reformation, the Protestant Revolution, and the time of civil war in Britain, in England. And he was writing a theory of politics in which he was advocating the reestablishment of central authority, and he called this book the Leviathan. And he established this notion of contract theory, that we, the people of England, and he wasn't talking about peasants, he was talking about lords, aristocrats, that we're going to give up our right to carry weapons and kill and defend ourselves using deadly force against each other, and we're going to give it to this giant, this Leviathan, right? And this is Charles II, the head of Charles II, who would become constitutional monarch to end the English civil wars of the 17th century. And if you look closely at this picture, you can see, if I can make it bigger, that this body of the Leviathan is made up of aristocrats, priests, bishops, all agreeing to create the Leviathan, to give up their right to use deadly force, to give it to the central authority in the face of the king, and he will have the right to use deadly force in the form of the sword, right? And he will legitimate his authority through. He's also head of the Anglican Church, because this is 150 years after the British monarch broke with the Pope, and the King of Britain is also officially the head of the Church of England. So this would persuade, this is the bishop's staff, this would persuade the people to obey him, both out of fear and out of religious obligation. And this is necessary. Look, and he towers over the countryside so that all the people living in these villages are no longer afraid because they fear him. And if anybody who disobeys him, he will crush them. And so you, living in the countryside here, no longer have to worry about being stabbed in the back, because the mighty, powerful Leviathan is towering over you, towering over everybody. And so you can engage in business and commerce, and you can engage with some belief that the world is a nasty, brutish place, as it exists in the state of nature without the Leviathan. In the state of nature without the Leviathan. You know, there's a great quote by Thomas Hobbes, right? There is no culture, there is no business, there is no commerce, and life is nasty, brutish, and short. So we agree, and under a contract, to give our authority, our right to use deadly force on our own to the Leviathan, and he will protect us. And this is relevant today, that supposedly, you know, the United States plays this role in West Europe, and these are no longer individuals, but these are, here you see Germany, here you see France, here you see Italy, here you see Portugal, here you see Greece, here you see, you know, and this is Donald Trump. All right, if you can imagine Donald Trump there, he's a Leviathan, and that's why you're able to have the European Union, because the United States is the Leviathan in Europe. And that's why you're able to have trade and business between Korea and South Korea and Japan, not because the Japanese and the Koreans like each other, but because the United States is here. So you might say this is very self-serving, and maybe it is, But this is structural realism. Structural realism has been heavily influenced by Thomas Hobbes and Hobbes' theory of politics in his book, The Leviathan, in 1651, right? At the end of the English Civil Wars. And John Locke, he's also mentioned in the Hooke textbook. He is responding. He was born 40, 50 years later after Thomas Hobbes. He's responding to Thomas Hobbes. Everybody's responding to Thomas Hobbes. And he's saying, look, people's human nature is not so bad as Thomas Hobbes described. People want money, right? He was the one that came up and developed political contract theory even further, that people have certain basic rights given by God, and those are the rights to life, liberty, and the ownership of property. He represents the emerging middle class, the bourgeoisie, the middle class in England. And he's saying people want to do business. They want a better life for themselves. They want to make money, right? So that I can take care of myself and I can take care of my children, right? And that's what they want. So, yeah, you want to create a central government, but that central government cannot be tyrannical. That Leviathan cannot use its own force arbitrarily to take away my liberty, not to mention confiscate my property, saying I need it because I need your property because I need to build an army. You can't do it like that, right? He had a view of human nature that was less evil, and that's the focus of liberalism. He is one of the founders of political liberalism, right? Hobbes develops contract theory, and he would be part of the liberal tradition, but he is one of the founders of political liberalism. And this notion that was articulated by Woodrow Wilson, right? That if you let the natural pro-business oriented aspects of human behavior, nature, to come forth by getting rid of these tyrants and criminals who happen to wear crowns and claim to be dukes and barons, and they have the right to tell everybody else what to do because of ancient tradition. He doesn't like so much ancient tradition. Remember, he was also a Protestant dissident and Protestant theologian and thinker. He doesn't have so much confidence in or faith in tradition, and that people should rule because it's their ancient feudal right. No, right? And so this will become part of liberal theory that is discussed here later in the book, right? Liberal theory and global governance. Liberal theorists do not accept that people are naturally bad and that the anarchic structure of international relations inevitably leads to conflict, because there are some bad people, just like there are criminals, but most of us are here in this world do not want to stab and kill for the sake of it. There are a few people who want to do that, and we have to control them, and you need a police force. But and you have those bad criminals leading some states: Saddam Hussein, maybe Kim Jong-un in North Korea, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia, Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Get rid of those mafiosi, those criminals, get rid of those bad guys, and the naturally cooperative, business-oriented nature of human beings will come forth, right? Because people want to do business, right? And they need to do business to gain win-win outcomes. Most human interaction is not zero-sum. Your gain is my loss, and my gain is your loss. No, most people want to do business. They want to exchange. That's what business is all about: win-win outcomes, right? And Locke emphasized that, and in justifying how we should have democratic representative political systems. And if a government is tyrannical and abusive, it should be overthrown. I do not have to obey it. In fact, I have a duty to overthrow it. But he emphasizes this interdependence element. This liberal theory emphasizes interdependence. And to solve those, it's in our interest to solve those. We have to cooperate. And there are bad people that want to deny that, but most people are cooperative, and they should organize themselves to deal with the bad people. And the international organizations emerge by powerful countries to exploit those possibilities for more welfare for everybody through cooperation, like through the World Trade Organization. Keep in mind, you know, much of the world is not aware of how interdependent we all are. You can say, well, we're interdependent, we're interdependent, we're independent. Question is, one of the big questions is, how many people understand that? One of the purposes of education is to become aware of our interdependence. That's why we study social science, business, economics, political science, international relations. It's why you also study literature and humanities, right? We're emotionally interdependent. No man, to quote John Donne, a contemporary literary writer, contemporary with John Locke, no man is an island. No man is an island, emotionally, not to mention materially, right? And science illustrates that interdependence more and more and more. It's always been there, but the question is, how widespread is it? And those people who are enthusiastic supporters of Donald Trump are the least aware of that factual interdependence. So how are you going to deal with that? And the Chinese Communist Party says, I'll tell you how you have to deal with them. You need a vanguard of the proletariat, led by the form of the Communist Party that is wisely led to lead the people. Because if you don't, they point to the American system. You elected Donald Trump, America. Don't tell us that your model is the better model, better than everybody else's. That you're exceptional, America. You're just lucky, they say. You weren't surrounded by powerful enemies the way China was. You weren't subjected to genocidal attacks from Japan the way China was.
Professor?
Yeah.
I have a question. Why would you say following Donald Trump is giving up one's interdependence?
I'm not saying that giving it up. They're among, statistically, they're among those people who are least aware of the interdependence, right? So they're people.
Could you?
Yeah.
No, I mean, could you explain it more specifically?
If you look, for example, that they tend to have less levels of education than people that supported other political figures. They tend to be people that are poorer. They tend to be people that come from less diverse backgrounds, like not from multiracial backgrounds. I'm not saying everybody's that way. I'm saying tendencies and statistical tendencies. So, you know, we've always been interdependent. The question is, how extensively and how widely are we aware of our interdependence, right? And one can make that point that one of the functions of education is to make us aware of that, so that we're more successful individually, as well as community, as a group. I mean, for example, the point has often been made, I haven't checked recently, but like a couple of years ago, the level of economic interdependence among the countries of Europe in 1914 at the start of World War I was about the same as a percentage of gross national product. This is all estimates, mind you, just estimates. As a percentage of gross national product, what we call gross national product, because that's a post-World War II creation as a economic statistic and macroeconomics, was about the same as it is today in terms of the level of economic integration amongst the economies between Germany and Austria-Hungary Empire and England and France. Yet they still had World War I. So just being economically interdependent isn't sufficient to promote peace. People have to be aware of it. They have to understand it. They have to know what it means. They have to understand cause and effect. Science, social science and natural science. That if you do this, it results in that. Right? So, but anyway, so go on here. So in liberalism, non-state actors are in world politics, such as Amnesty International and Greenpeace, play an important role in pushing states to share a common national interest by lobbying these national governments regarding transnational problems. okay, let me try to explain this. This is important because liberalism tends to emphasize state level factors. State level factors, remember the 3 levels of analysis according to Kenneth Waltz, you know, international system, state level, and individual level factors of analysis. Liberalism tends to emphasize state level factors as being more important in explaining state behavior. Liberalism tends to emphasize state level factors as being more important in explaining foreign policy. Structural realists tend to focus upon international system level, particularly anarchy and international system, that there's no world government. They tend to emphasize international system level factors. Liberals tend to emphasize state level factors of analysis. More so. I mean, they understand that, you know, the international system level, I mean, they want to create world institutions like the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and earlier the League of Nations. But they focus their strategies for peace on state level factors of analysis. You want to have capitalism, and you want to have a government that reflects business interests, which means you need a government that has some degree of democracy, because, you know, governments in a democracy respond to their powerful domestic interests, and people who have money are influential, right? And who's got money? Business people. And who knows best about what business needs? Business people know best about what business needs. So a government should listen to them. And liberals would point to South Korea, right? That, you know, why did South Korea become a democracy in 1987 or begin in 1987? Because it's a modern, developed, industrialized society. Having a military dictatorship with generals who, you know, may or may not understand business, they understand guns, and they understand North Korea, and, you know, but they're not really best at responding to the needs of a modern economy. You need a democratic government, if only because a state is like a large, multi-diverse organization. And you need lots of feedback from all of the diverse groups and constituencies, including the business groups, including the farmers, including the workers, into the leadership of that organization, for the organization leadership to be able, possibly, to make wise, effective, good policies. And that means more or less democracy, they argue. I'm not saying I agree with them, but that's what they argue. The Chinese say, no, you don't. You don't need democracy. We're doing just fine under the Communist Party with this one-party state. But this is what liberals claim. And then, you know, that was the hope, that when China joined the World Trade Organization and became developed like South Korea, it would democratize, the way South Korea and Taiwan democratized. That should happen to China as well. But on a big scale. Did it happen? Not yet. Will it happen? Liberals say maybe, you know, but you got these bad people, you know, Xi Jinping and his ruling clique, who are the problem. But, you know, Chinese business people, they would probably prefer not to have to bribe and you know, and Communist Party officials and, you know, bow down and obey whatever Xi Jinping wants them to do, you know. But, you know, they need help, and America will help them. Very dangerous game, very dangerous political game. So, but liberals emphasize there's growing awareness that there's more and more problems and challenges facing the governments and states of the world, and it requires interstate cooperation to address them. Okay, maybe so, but, you know, you still have setbacks. But, you know, hey, in the business world, we have setbacks too. Companies make mistakes. The leadership of companies and organizations make mistakes, and if they make enough mistakes to go out of business. Okay, so the British made a mistake with Brexit. They'll learn from their mistake, or they'll suffer more. The Americans, they elected Donald Trump. They'll learn from their mistake, just like Samsung makes mistakes. Okay. So, but you know, the key point here is these people have a generally more nice view of human nature, more benign view of human nature than these people. These people, you know, think that people are basically bad. These structural realists, human nature is basically bad, and you gotta create a world organization. You have to create a government on the basis of that assumption. You gotta scare the hell out of people that if they disobey the Leviathan, Leviathan will crush them. We'll see them, identify them, and destroy them. Liberals say, no, you know, you got problem people, but you know, don't view people as an obstacle. View people as resources. So, you know, a principle, an idea that emerged particularly after the end of the Cold War was this notion of democratic peace. Somebody made this argument that democratic countries don't go to war with each other. That Germany and France and the United States, now that prosperous democracies, prosperous established democracies don't threaten and use deadly force against each other. And so, and that's something to keep in mind, that as countries become developed economically, it's harder and harder for them to threaten and use deadly force. And that's been very controversial, that claim, this democratic peace hypothesis. That has been articulated a lot. Some people say that that's kind of self-serving, that, you know, that basically it justifies why American influence expansion when the communist Soviet Union collapsed, that the United States should work to spread capitalism and democracy through any means necessary. It should bring democracy to Saddam Hussein's Iraq, for example. That we'll invade Iraq, get rid of that genocidal mafia ruling Saddam Hussein clique, put a democratic government in place with a constitution that protects minorities, and, you know, have U.S. Forces there to, like they have forces in Europe, and we will bring peace to the Middle East the way we brought peace to Europe. Of course, there were other, you know, there were of course, there's some validity to this point. I mean, obviously, this notion that, you know, that as Europe becomes more and more prosperous, that becomes more and more difficult for Europeans to consider going to war with each other might seem true, but you know, it's a complicated question. I mean, like, for example, I told you I was teaching at the American University in Bulgaria from 1994 to 2009, and Yugoslavia, neighboring Yugoslavia, right next door to Bulgaria, disintegrated into civil war that killed thousands and thousands of people and generated millions of refugees. And Serbia, its income per person fell by 50% over the course of those wars from 1992 until the year 2000. Serbian per capita income of the people fell by half. I mean, of course, the ruling elites and cliques, corrupt mafiosi became very rich, but the material quality of life of the people in Serbia fell by half. So you can't make a direct claim that the richer people become, the more and more peaceful they become. But, you know, there is some relationship to this notion that basically, as the world, as we become more economically developed and prosperous through economic industrialization and development, and we engage in more trade and integration through trade, that we become more aware of our interdependence, and we need to cooperate, more aware of the need to cooperate to protect that. But still, that didn't stop Brexit. Although we don't really know what Brexit means yet. They're still talking, they themselves don't understand what Brexit fully entails in Britain. So Immanuel Kant, you know, I mean, there was always this notion that we're a European society and we Europeans have to work to be at peace with each other. And he was right at the end of the 18th century, you know, before Napoleon and then World War I and World War II. The Cold War helped create a North Atlantic community of Europe and European integration, a security community building on an informal system of military economic cooperation, making war between North American and West European countries unthinkable. Okay, maybe it is unthinkable. Of course, the Americans claim that, you know, again, because of structural realism, because America is there. That is the fundamental, not sufficient, but certainly necessary precondition for European peace, at least in Western Europe. And okay, constructivism is the third paradigm or perspective after realism and liberalism. There's constructivism. And constructivism emphasizes how we construct the world we live in through our socialization, through the institutions of education, of family, of the state that make us think and perceive the world in certain ways. And this is important for trying to understand how the world changes, right? So keep in mind, when I was born, if I had been kidnapped after I was born by the nurse and taken to Germany, I would not be an American today. I would be a German. If I was constructed into being an American, I was constructed through when I was born, maybe even before I was born, in terms of sensories coming in. But after I was born, in terms of my family, in terms of my worldview, I was made into an American. I was constructed that way. You were constructed being French or Koreans or Japanese or Russians or Chinese. And maybe less so in being Zimbabwean, because Zimbabwe is not a nation state like Japan and the United States and Germany and France are. It's a multi-ethnic post-colonial state in which there are a multiplicity of cultures, primary intensity ethnic cultures that compete and are in conflict with each other. But and so the reason we want to know this is because if you were to make a time machine, build a time machine today, and say you set that time machine to go back to 1,000 years ago, to 1000 AD France. France, what we call France today, 1,000 years ago. And you set the timer to your time machine, I want to go to 1000 AD France, or what we call Burgundy region, blah, blah, blah. And you dress appropriately, you study how people dressed, and you learn the dialect that was spoken back then, at that region, and you popped out in the French territory, and you went walking along. And of course, since you're walking along, you're a giant because you grew up in a well-fed society without terrible poverty and without famine and without disease. So you're huge. And you're walking along the countryside, and you come up to some peasant. Let's say some peasant, doesn't run away in fear, and you're able to communicate to that person. You ask that person, "Who are you?" You're clearly not from, I'm clearly not from around this area. This person I'm talking to is not going to say, "Well, I am French." They're not going to know what France is. They don't know what France is. They don't know what that is. They know their family and they know their village. That's it. Right? They don't know, they live their whole lives not moving more than several kilometers from where they were born. Their entire life, for 90% of the people, is not moving beyond 7-8 kilometers where they were born. They can't speak, they can't read foreign language, they can't read, they're illiterate. They go to church. There's a priest there in the church. Remember, and people, they're going to church all the time, because I think I saw in one film that there would be a death in a village in Europe, in medieval Europe, once every 8 days. So there's funerals all of the time, death everywhere. Women, they get married as soon as they can. They make babies until they can no longer make babies. Babies are being born and dying, and people are living and dying. Death is everywhere, right? And the priest tells them a story about how God lives up above the clouds, and there's angels, and God makes the sun come up and the sun go down, and it causes the seasons, and that there's something called a king who serves God, and the king protects us from our enemies, and they don't know what that king is, where that king, they don't know, right? They don't know what France is. Over centuries and generations, things changed. Things changed because the pace of economic change advanced and changed and developed and accelerated, right? France in 1000 AD is very different from the territory we call France at 0 AD. The France that we call, what we call France today at 1000 years after 0 AD is very different from the France of 2000 AD. And the point is, people have acquired new identities. They're constructed in new ways in terms of their thinking about who they are and where they are and what the world is. So, can we construct a European identity? Can we make people that live in Europe, who live in France, Germany, Italy, Greece, to feel and construct a Europe and make them feel European, maybe more European than they feel French, more European than they feel Italian, more European than they feel German? Is that possible? Can that happen? Why would it stop? The process of constructing identities never changes. I mean, never stops. It does change. It never stops. So that's what constructivists focus on, right? How does the way we perceive and understand the world, how is it constructed? How does it change? Why does it change? Identity is an issue, right? Identities of people living in communities change, right? In order to be a nationalist, you have to know more about what's going on in the world beyond your village. You have to understand that there's a world out there, that there's people who live hundreds, maybe thousands of kilometers away from you, who make decisions that affect your well-being. It's always been true. We've always been interdependent. Do you understand it? And as the pace of economic change accelerates and develops faster and faster and faster, people become aware of the fact, you know what, the world does change. It's always been changing, but more and more people become aware of the fact that the world does change. And you know what changes it? People change it. Not God, not Allah, not the spirits in the mountain. People change the world. And once you become aware of that, you want to participate in it, because you want to participate in the decisions and actions that affect your well-being and the well-being of people you love. You become aware of politics. You become part of public opinion. And this, there have always been people that were aware of what was France, right? There was a great quote, right, at the end of the French Wars of Religion, right, where some French aristocrat trying to become king of France, he made a deal with somebody, and he was a Huguenot, right? He was a Protestant. To become king of France, this was like in the 15th century, he said he had to convert to Catholicism. He said, Paris is worth a mass. That person is a French nationalist. That person knows what France is. But the mass of the population do not, until today. Until beginning in Europe about 200 years ago. And the biggest impact of that we saw, the French Revolution. That's where you saw mass politics make its debut on a massive way in Europe, the French Revolution. But the rest of the world is only about 100 years behind Europe. And this process of the mass of the population becoming politically aware and politically participatory and demanding to participate in politics and deciding who will lead them happens in the Asia and Africa and Latin America, but mostly Asia and Africa in the 20th century during the Cold War. And this leads to nationalism, and this nationalism becomes the most powerful force breaking up empires. In Africa, European empires, states, defeating the United States in Vietnam, Vietnamese nationalism. During the Cold War in the 20th century. And the Americans don't understand this. So the Americans, and they feel threatened by it because, for example, they defend Israeli nationalism to create Israel, but they're opposed to Arab nationalism because Arab nationalism wants to unify all Arabs in one state, and that threatens Israel. So they ally with these feudal medieval regimes like the House of Saud, the Saudi royal family in Saudi Arabia, or the royal family in Kuwait, or the royal families in the United Arab Emirates, and in Bahrain. And so Donald Trump makes a big deal about how these feudal archaic regimes are recognizing Israel. See, he's bringing peace to the Middle East. But that means the United States is allying against Arab nationalists and they do it, through covert means. CIA is all over the place in these countries. So that's the short course in the study of nationalism, all right? But so I'll just keep going here. So okay, here's a table 3.1 in the book. Structural realism, U.S. foreign policy towards People's Republic of China. Structural realism says that there's going to be a conflict between China and the United States automatically, because remember, people like power. If you have power, you're not going to give it up, because people are greedy. They're greedy for money and they're greedy for power. That's just the way people are, including the Americans. Structuralists don't really care so much about democracy and the like. Yeah, it's not unimportant, but it was natural. There will be a conflict between U.S. and China because China is growing faster, becoming more powerful relative to the United States. And this will lead to inevitable conflict. Hopefully, it won't lead to violent conflict because now we have nuclear weapons. In the past, it's always led to war between, France and Britain, or Germany and France, or Germany and England. Liberalism says, no, we can accommodate the rise of China through co-opting China into the world liberal economic system that the U.S. created, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and China and the America can cooperate because they all want this system to thrive, even if they want to modify it and reform it to serve their own respective interests. They want to defend it because it's the goose that laid the golden egg for everybody, to use an American, I think it's, a Western expression. And constructivism says Americans, because they're nationalistic, will tend to see a rising China as a threat, and China will also see threats because it's human beings tend to look for outsiders to be, or external challengers, because it's part of human nature to construct enemies. So, but again, this is the emphasis on the Hook textbook, looking at state level factors of analysis, the so-called black box. Remember, structuralists, they're not so much concerned about what's going on inside countries. They focus upon anarchy of the international system, relative power capability, and they emphasize military power, right? How many tanks, how high-tech weapons you have, how many can you build? That tends to be what they emphasize. In terms of explaining how states act over the years, structuralists focus upon relative power capabilities in aggregate of the states, right? In extreme ways, they tend to look at states like billiard balls, right? You don't need to look inside them. You don't need to look inside the black box. Liberals and constructivists, they do tend to look inside the black box. Let's look inside the United States. Let's look inside China. Let's look inside Russia. Let's look at the American political institutions, the way the Americans structure their media, the way the Americans are divided by ethnic and racial groups. We need to look inside the black box of America, and that's the focus of the book. All right, so the external environment, the international system puts demands or pressures on the United States, rising China. Okay, there's going to be some response to that. China's becoming more and more prosperous. China's businesses are competing more and more with American companies. Chinese military is building more and more ships. All right, how do the Americans respond to that? How do the American black box respond? We have to look inside the black box of America to see how it responds to these external demands. Inside of the black box are U.S. internal politics. And those people that participate in U.S. internal politics include civil society groups, business groups, nonprofit groups, including ethnic lobbies. Like I said, you can't explain U.S. policy towards the Middle East unless you understand the Israel lobby in the United States. It's not sufficient, but you need to understand that. It's not all about money. Bureaucracies, including defense military bureaucracies that have lots of friends in the Middle East that built up over many years, the foreign, the State Department bureaucracy, and so on. And at the third level, remember the three levels of analysis, right, on Kenneth Waltz, what's going on inside Donald Trump's head? What's going on inside individual decision makers? You know, it makes a difference who is the person in charge in the United States, because compared to some other countries, the American president has a great degree of decisional freedom of choice or decisional latitude in doing what he or she wants to do, for good or bad. You know, I mean, I think it really makes a difference, say in 1963, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. John F. Kennedy was president of the United States. He was a very interesting person. He had a small group of advisors, his executive committee advising him how to respond to the Soviet Union putting nuclear missiles in Cuba, 150 kilometers off the coast of Florida, off the coast of the United States. And during this escalating crisis, in which John F. Kennedy was under tremendous pressure from other American political leaders, young guy in his mid-40s, John F. Kennedy, he had this executive committee, or ExComm for short, advising him, consisting of generals and top politicians in his administration. And the majority of the ExComm members wanted him to invade Cuba, destroy the Soviet military bases already there in Cuba, get rid of Fidel Castro, who had become communist leader of Cuba through a revolution. Get rid of him. The Americans and ExComm, many of them thought he was a puppet of Nikita Khrushchev and the Soviet Union. Invade and occupy Cuba. And he decided not to. He overrode his executive committee. This young man in his 40s, talking to these generals who are in their 60s, you know. And if he had invaded Cuba, we might not be here today, right now. Because we found out after the Cold War ended in the early 1990s that the Soviet military units in Cuba, already had 240 tactical nuclear warheads at their disposal for them to use as they saw fit if they were attacked. They didn't have to call up Moscow. Moscow, I'm under attack. Am I allowed to use nuclear weapons? They didn't have to do that. We didn't know that at the time in 1963. We found that out in 1992 when Boris Yeltsin was president of Russia and he opened up the archives. So if he had listened to what his ExComm advisors, the majority wanted him to do, you can imagine, the American military moves in, starts bombing, killing Russian Soviet soldiers in Cuba. Chaos, fear, hatred, bloodshed, death, destruction. Takes one Soviet general saying, launch nuclear artillery to counteract the American attack, and would have started World War III. Because John F. Kennedy was John F. Kennedy. Donald Trump is Donald Trump. So, in fact, US foreign policy should be analyzed from these three different levels of analysis. Any explanation that you give to anything needs to include elements from all three levels of analysis. Structural realists tend to assume that, you know, yeah, this is significant, but, you know, over time, this is what's most important. Over time, states tend to act like rational actors, like billiard balls and playing billiards, you know. You can predict which way they're going to go in terms of, you know, relative power capabilities compared to each other, how they're going to act. You know, you can actually talk about objective national interests. You can talk about tangible measures of power like size of economy and size of military and objective threats and challengers. They tend to emphasize states as unitary actors. They don't open the black box. In fact, they think that that's a good idea. Look, the purpose of making theory is to make the world, the complicated, complex, incredibly complicated, complex world simpler than it is so that we can predict. We need to focus on the essence of reality to come up with theories to predict. So we don't need to open up the black box. In fact, we should try not to. We should try to develop theories that allow us to abstract from reality in a way that allows us to come up with more objective, predictable indicators of potential violent conflict in international relations without having to say, well, if you really want to understand the potential for conflict between China and the United States, you need to be an expert on the United States. You need to understand everything about American culture, American politics, and you need to understand everything about China. You need to understand Chinese history, you've got to speak Chinese language. You've got to, my God. In other words, you have to know everything about everything. Well, why do you come up with theory? You shouldn't have to know everything about everything if you want to try to make the world a better place. To predict the future so that you can control the future. Remember, we want to predict the future so we can control it. Okay, so this sort of develops this notion of state-level factors of analysis and international system-level factors of analysis. Systemic levels, we already talked about international system levels, society levels, governmental levels, individuals and groups. Yeah, I mean, these are the state and individual levels of analyses. So I've done a lot of talking. I just want to find a good place to stop and so that we can do something else here. Structural realists tend to focus on rational choice. They often fall back to economic interests, because you can make that point, right? That you can't have a strong military unless you have a strong economy. And a strong military includes high tech. So high tech means strong economy, right? So they tend to focus upon rational interests, rational choice, money, resources, because of the emphasis on military. And, so much of military and national security is high tech, which means economics, right? Of course, political scientists fight each other. A lot of people attack structural realists saying, this is not sufficient or adequate for explaining why states go to war with each other. I mean, can structural realism explain why the United States went to war with Iraq in 2003? You could say, yeah, I'm sure a structural realist would say, yeah, America was so powerful that compared to the rest of the world, that of course it was going to try to expand its influence into the rest of the Middle East, because Iraq, during the Cold War, Saddam Hussein's Iraq had been an ally of the Soviet Union. Then the Soviet Union disappeared. And America was faced with challenges and threats and insults from terrorists. And the Americans used the September 11, 2001 attacks as an opportunity to expand their sphere of influence even more into the former Soviet allied regions of the Middle East, Iraq, and now Syria and Afghanistan, right? Because the Soviet Union, the United States moves into Afghanistan, Iraq, and of course the Russians are now responding. They're not going to let America take Syria the way the Americans have taken Iraq from them. So the Russians have sent their troops and soldiers to try to hold on to Damascus, because from their point of view, America just can't have it all. Will the Russians succeed? like I told you, man, the entire economy is the size of Italy. But so far, Putin is still popular in Russia, despite the money being spent in Syria and Libya on their deployments there. Liberals, constructivists say internal political conflicts within the United States and competition among those different political groups are important, vital for understanding foreign policy behavior. The individual preferences and differences among individual policymakers who negotiate and bargain and compete among themselves to decide what the United States is going to do. We need to talk about that. Yes, liberals say, you want to understand American behavior in international relations, you need to become an American expert. You want to understand Chinese behavior in international relations, to do it right, you need experts on inside of China. You need Chinese experts. You cannot be an expert on Chinese foreign policy if you don't know China. And that means, you know, you need to know, I mean, if we're going to create American foreign policy towards China, maybe I'm not expert on China, but there need to be experts on China in the American government who can help us make American foreign policy towards China. Just like there needs to be experts on Russia, experts on North Korea, experts on any country. If you're going to have a foreign policy towards that country, you're going to need lots of different kinds of people with different kinds of expertise. You're not going to be able to focus just on structural realism to explain what America should do with regard to China. Keep in mind also, liberals emphasize that American politicians or Korean politicians or Russian politicians, they are foreign policy decision makers, but they're also domestic politicians. And they want to stay in power domestically, which means they've got to take domestic interests and actors into account in making their foreign policy in order to keep power inside their country. So they're playing politics at both the foreign policy level, international relations, and at the domestic policy level when they're making their foreign policy. It's a two-level game. This is an effort to try to make realism more receptive to domestic level factors, right? This is really emphasized in European Union studies, right? That European integration happens because of economic interest, primarily among actors within Germany and Italy and France, trying to pursue their economic interest in the European framework. So it's still kind of an effort to reconcile realism with liberalism. Yeah, so, you know, this is what the book focuses on. Government institutions, transnational civil society, you know, I mean, the global human rights movement, the global green movement is important for explaining American foreign policy, supposedly. Okay, so realism emphasizes the rational actor model. Say, policy area, key actors in foreign policy process, small groups of like-minded decision makers. According to the rational action model, there's a small group of like-minded decision makers that make American foreign policy. In the real world, you see there's all sorts of political conflict and competition among multiple different groups within America trying to determine what the US government does in foreign policy, including in the Congress, pressure groups, and this is all a focus of the textbook. Again, state preferences are not really so much objective. This book emphasizes this disputes by rival government and societal actors within America, between the federal government and the state governments, between interest groups, bureaucracies. That's what this book emphasizes. Nature of decision-making, the rational actor model tends to assume a centralized, consensual system. Others emphasize the fragmented and chaotic elements of this. The book kind of mixes these two. Degree of certainty regarding foreign policy problems. The rational actor model tends to assume that states know what they're doing. Government leaders of states are confident in doing and in choosing what they, relatively speaking, in doing and deciding what they decide to do. Real world emphasizes the incremental nature of policymaking. You can tell I'm more sympathetic with this here, right? Magnitude of foreign policy problems. How do you determine the size, the importance of an issue? This emphasizes cost-benefit analysis and often emphasizes money and material resources. This perspective tends to focus on emotion, identity, things that are not so easily quantifiable, like how much money is at stake, how much Defense Department budget do we need to spend, how many thousands of soldiers is it going to cost, or will we have to send, and how much will it cost to deploy soldiers somewhere. Implementation of policies, this tends to assume a high degree of efficiency. This tends to associate or assume bureaucratic breakdowns, delays, miscommunications, politics, political competition interfering with behavior. You know, human beings and organizations acting like human beings and organizations. Pursuing their own interests, their career interests, their identity interests, their organizational interests, their political ambitions. Outcome for US foreign policy, this tends to assume that we Americans choose what is optimal. This emphasizes suboptimal. So again, what's the benefit of this? People here, structural realists, say, what in God's name is the benefit of having a theory if you're going to cover everything? The purpose of theory is to simplify and focus on the essential features that drive a country's foreign policy behavior. If you're going to emphasize this, then you better have a theory that tells me what from all of this determines what from all of this complexity is going to be important in a particular foreign policy at a particular point in time and can predict when. Tell me. I think I can because of my theoretical perspective, which emphasizes a theory of nationalism. But these people say, you can't. This is the way to go, to develop a theory of international relations and foreign policy. Okay, so just to conclude here, I think, what do I want to cover here? Well, there's a lot to cover. Some of this is from another book, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. So the matrix of US foreign policy, you got transnational civil society, human rights organizations, ethnic diasporas, right? The Israel lobby is strong not only in the United States, it's strong in Russia. There's a lot of Russian Jews who live in Israel, who moved to Israel. 1 million Russian Jews and former Soviet Union Jews moved to Israel after the Soviet Union collapsed. So the Jewish diaspora is influential in explaining Russian behavior, American behavior. It's along with the transnational environmental movement, the transnational human rights movement to highlight and expose the abuses going on inside countries and pressuring the American government, the South Korean government, the Japanese government to change their policy behavior. Of course, they might be used and exploited, like Donald Trump. And the Trump administration is supposed to be very concerned about human rights abuses among the Uyghur Muslim minority in China, where up to 1 million Uyghur Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang province are in re-education camps, concentration camps, because of the threat of political Islam. And Donald Trump was saying, oh, that's so terrible. Those human rights abuses, oh, in China are so bad. When, of course, he doesn't care that much about human rights in other cases. He doesn't care so much about human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, and against the Palestinians. And so, governments exploit these transnational civil society concerns to pursue their own interests, right? And the interstate system that you have, you need to cooperate and compete with other countries to address trade issues, to get to the benefits of international trade, to deal with nuclear proliferation. I mean, China doesn't want more and more countries necessarily having nuclear weapons as well, along with the United States, to deal with climate change. And they're all exploiting and trying to use each other in making foreign policy. Okay, so it's 11:30. I've gone on, and I had a lot of things planned, like how about a poll? And let's see, what kind of polls do I have? I got to remind myself, what are the polls I have here? Okay, here's a good poll. Respond to the following statement. The U.S. has a global power and influence advantage over, we're sharing this, right? Okay. Has a power advantage over China in international relations because the U.S. is a diverse, immigrant-based national community. But the U.S. has a global power and influence advantage over you Koreans, over you French, over you Belgians, over in the rest of the world because the U.S. is diverse and democratic compared to China, which is 94% Chinese. It's a one-party state with a tradition of strong central government authority in Beijing and in the central government, and a fear that if we decentralize and devolve power away from the central government, it'll lead to the disintegration of China. Whereas America has a great degree of federalism, right? And devolution of authority, reflecting that liberal distrust about overly powerful central government authorities. So how do you respond? Please respond to the survey question, to the poll. Vote. Three more. We've got 9 of 12. We need three more votes. Two more, one more. One more. Okay, end poll. Share results. So most of you think that's true. Most of you think that's true. So there was a reason why I asked that question. And I think I want to go to, there's something that I must have shown here, right? Here is a newspaper editorial in the New York Times, and the media is one of the chapters in the Hook textbook, right? This is from just a week ago, right? China says it has dealt with the coronavirus more effectively than the Americans. The Americans, it's still out of control. The virus is raging throughout America. China has controlled the virus and is reopening its schools and universities, right? China says the reopening of classrooms proves that its top-down system is superior to overwhelmed teachers and students stuck on campuses. Its restrictions can feel like overkill, supposedly. So I'm not going to go through the whole article. It's a long article, right? But just to highlight some claims here. While the Chinese Communist Party has adopted many of the same sanitation and distancing procedures used elsewhere, it has rolled them out with a characteristic all-out command and control approach that brooks no dissent. It has mobilized battalions of local officials and party cadres to inspect classrooms, deployed apps and other technology to monitor students and staff, and restricted their movements. It has even told parents to stay away for fear of spreading germs. China's leader, Xi Jinping, said in a speech on Tuesday that the country's progress in fighting the virus, including the opening of schools, had fully demonstrated the clear superiority of Communist Party leadership and our socialist system. China's top-down, state-led political system allows the party to drive its vast bureaucracy in pursuit of a single target an approach that would be nearly impossible anywhere else in the world. They note here that the pandemic is still raging. It's still not out of control. We don't even know. I mean, it's just, they've given up in the US. In China, where the virus has largely been under control for months, there is no such debate. The party controls the courts and the news media and quashes any perceived threats to its agenda. Local bureaucracies have little choice but to obey the orders of an all-powerful central government. Independent labor unions are banned and activism is discouraged, making it difficult for the country's more than 12 million teachers to organize. Administrators have corralled college students into campuses, forbidding them to leave school grounds to eat or meet friends. The Chinese system moves by itself, said Yong Zhao, a scholar at University of Kansas who has studied education in China. The system is run like a military. It just goes for it, no matter what anyone thinks. In many ways, China is applying the same heavy-handed model to reopen schools that is used to bring the virus under control. To stop the epidemic, the authorities imposed harsh lockdowns and employed invasive technology to track residents, raising public anger in some places concerned about the erosion of privacy and civil liberties. Altogether now, one heart and one mind to prevent and control the epidemic, says a propaganda slogan plastered around school grounds. The opening of schools has given Mr. Xi a propaganda win in a time of slowing economic growth and international criticism over his government's early cover-up and mishandling of the outbreak. The state-run news media has closely covered America's difficulties in resuming classes, while highlighting China's progress in getting parents back to work, key to the country's attempts to drive economic recovery. And its economy is recovering, it's growing. The US and Belgium and France are still in dire emergency. Do you plan to lock us up for life? Complained Pan Sheng, a sophomore at Changshu Institute of Technology in the eastern province of Jiangsu on Weibo, a microblogging site. I feel like I'm in high school, Ms. Pan said in an interview. We came to college to gather knowledge and learn how to conduct ourselves in a society, not just sit in a class at school every day. Despite the hassle of some of the restrictions, many families welcome the resumption of classes. After months of leading makeshift lessons in their living rooms and nagging their children about playing too many video games, parents are relieved to be able to send them back to classes and after-school tutoring programs. We controlled the epidemic well. It will be good for our country, said Sophia Tang, the mother of a high school freshman in the eastern city of Hangzhou. If we handled this at all like they are handling it overseas, there would be riots. Okay, so you know there's a presidential campaign going on right now in the United States. You are news media specialists, 1 and 2 in the Biden-Harris Democratic campaign, and 3 and 4 in the Trump-Pence Republican political campaign for US president, with the election ending on November 3. Write a 25 to 75 letter letter to the editor of the New York Times responding to or commenting on this news report. So the first person listed in the randomly generated Zoom breakout rooms is the chairperson of the group. So come up with an outline of a 25 to 75 word letter to the editor responding to this news report. The Chinese are saying, our system is the best. We've overcome the virus. Our economy is growing. Children are going back to school, back to universities. Belgium, America are disasters compared to us. Disasters. I mean, the virus is restarting in Belgium and France. They're getting a second outbreak, right? So you're trying to win the election. So let's go to stop share for a second and breakout rooms and to 4 groups and automatically see what happens here. I think these are different. Okay, so Pak Horyang, you're chair of group 1. Antoine, you're chair of group 2. Sung Hoon, you're chair of group 3. Clara, you're chair of group 4. And to go back to that, share screen. And 1 and 2, remember, you are Biden-Harris campaign specialists. 3 and 4, you are Trump-Pence campaign specialists. Write a short letter to the editor responding to this New York Times editorial for Americans to read that describes how the Chinese government is telling their people how clearly the communist system in China is better than the American system or the Belgian or French system. Go! So give your give your feedback to those chair people so that they can respond. Okay. Open all rooms. Okay, go. Remember, you're busy people. In the midst of the presidential campaign, the most important presidential campaign in modern US history, right? You're trying to win. You want to beat Trump or beat Biden, and you want to get the American people to support, and you want to get the American voters to support you, and you want them to feel proud about being American when America is doing so badly in dealing with the virus compared to China. Laura, where's Laura? Join group 4, Laura. You got 4 minutes. Claire?
Emphasize,
Claire?
we have to emphasize
Yeah,
why
you guys are
Trump
talking.
has to
Good,
be.
good. I'll leave. All right, I just want to make sure you're talking. Okay, bye-bye.
I think
So then which side are we?
You're
Mr.
con. I mean,
Biden,
you're Trump. You're Trump Pence. Trump and Pence.
Trump.
How about
Uh, you cannot send me directly in private.
sir, do you know how to send like a private message to each other?
You want a copy of the assignment?
No,
No. We would like
I'm trying to
to.
write those. Yeah.
What?
Oh, so I'm trying to write a statement for Antoine,
Okay. Okay.
but I don't think I could send like a private message to him.
Well, you don't have much time. You only have 2 minutes. So whoever's
true.
the chair of the group, please take leadership and come up with a draft and have the other members of the group amend it, because you have just 3 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
혹시 아시는 분 있나요? 잘 모르겠죠.
네, 무슨 노래죠? Sir, we are with question about
Yeah.
we want to talk about the perspective in the Biden,
Yeah.
or should we just tell about our opinion?
No, role play. Biden, Harris. You want to win the election.
Yeah, but we are a little bit confused because Joe Biden and also Trump has they have little bit not aggressive, what's the word? It's not close relationship between China, so in that way we thought they have a little bit similar way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this hostility to China is cross the different parties. It's cross-partisan in the U.S. But I think Biden wants to blame Trump for failure, and saying that if he becomes president, he will once again maybe appeal and use America's inherent advantages as being the land of freedom and openness and transparency to show the world that the democratic system is the better system. Trump is bad, 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 bad. because he has failed in his duty to exploit America's inherent openness and advantage to show the world that democracy is best. And Biden will redeem America in the eyes of, and democracy in the eyes of the rest of the world if he is elected in November.
Also, we have to talk like with the Democrat.
Yeah. This is a letter to editor. Everybody, millions of people are going to see this, your letter.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk. Who's going to speak first? So I'm going to flip a coin here, and heads it's 1 or 2, tails it's 3 or 4, and it's tails. Heads it's group 3, and it's heads. Group 3, Sung-Hun. Sung-Hun, tell us the outline or the first draft of your letter to the editor of the New York Times in response to this article.
So like within
Hello.
so we weren't so clear on the topic, but what we understood was that whether Chinese I think we were supposed to say that the actions that President Trump made in the United States worked better than in China, right?
What are they actually saying? They're actually saying that China military base in Wuhan created this virus and let it go in the rest of the world to attack us. It's not our fault. The Chinese have launched a biological attack on the rest of the world. That's what they're saying. Or some people, not Trump. Well, he's calling it the Wuhan virus. There are people within the administration saying this. We think that the Chinese military made that virus and let it go out to destroy their enemies. Pretty nasty stuff that they're saying, not unofficially, to their media friends behind the scenes, to try to get Americans to support them. Say it's not our fault, it's the evil Chinese. They're so bad. And only Trump has the will and the strength to stand up to those evil Chinese, the evilest enemy since the Soviet Union. That's what they're saying. Okay, we're running out of time. And so stop share and go to who's next? Heads is 1 or 2, and it's tails. Group 4, Clara, what did your group come up with?
So we tried to see why Trump has to be reelected, and we said that Trump supporters generally believe Trump can make America stronger and great again. So thanks to the new sense of diplomacy he has brought to the world, especially. And Trump supporters also emphasize the fact that he can revive the US economy, since the US had many losses with the China economic war, and Trump worked a lot on going back to normal and make America great again, so that's why he has to be reelected.
Yeah, you can see how this is dangerous stuff. The American Trump administration is telling the people, not Trump, but people below him anonymously are telling the media that this was something created by the Chinese military, that they were created in their laboratory, that they may or may not purposely let out. And that can instigate and increase tension and lead to conflict. Those kinds of rhetoric, that kind of words, right? And it's all motivated by a desire for Trump to win the election in 45 days. Okay, we're running out of time. So let's see, group 1 or 2. Heads is group 1, and it is tails, group 2. Antoine, what did your group come up with?
Yes,
Antoine.
Sorry. So we think that Joe Biden will be elected because Donald Trump don't manage very well the coronavirus crisis. And we thought that Joe Biden will have a better relationship with China, but condemn China because it's not a democratic regime, you know. But I think Joe Biden maybe could give a better response to the coronavirus crisis.
Okay. Did we already do? Okay, and then group 1, Ho Young, what did your group come up with?
Our group said like someone said like seeking to draw a contrast with Trump, who has often shied away from criticizing China over human rights. Biden has promised to hold China accountable over its treatment of Uyghur and Xinjiang and its crackdown in Hong Kong. Also, we think it is more effective to solve international problems like pandemic in a more open and democratic way than to exercise rightness and cover it up.
Okay, so well done, well done. And I like that because it illustrates how, I mean, that's what the Trump administration is doing. They're claiming that they're not at fault because the Chinese did this on purpose. We were attacked. And so it's a very dangerous situation we're in right now. So I think we need to stop there. And does anybody have any questions before we end? If no, okay, I will be in communication with you regarding your paragraphs, okay? Talk to you later. See you Friday. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor. Thank you.